Welcome to MyLife, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
The continuing journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is in the schus and the Ilim Nishmas of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg and Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKoyen Katz, all of Hashalom. It is also in the merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel and Risha Katz, Le'erich Yomim V'shonim B'tevis, for many healthy years. So, we're right in the middle of Perek Aleph, the first chapter of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe has already demonstrated the thoroughness that is one of his trademark features of citing different Chazal, our sages, in order to understand who we are and our mission in this world. So it began with being a Tzaddik, the oath and the empowerment that each of us receives. Be a Tzaddik and do not be a Rasha. But what does Tzaddik and Rasha mean? Simple, you could say the righteous person and don't be a wicked person. The Alter Rebbe wants more than that. Not just the behavioral and actions, but personality, who we are fundamentally. We also introduced the Beinani, the intermediary, the in-between person. And the Alter Rebbe so far established that you cannot say it's only based on people's actions with all the different proofs that he brought. The last thing we learned was about the Beinani. What is a Beinani? You cannot say a Beinani is half mitzvahs and half the opposite. Like he said, mechze zochias and mechze avenis, half merits and half sins. Because Rabbi said that, like I, as an example, I'm a Beinani. And Rabbi clearly was not someone that had half-half. Not only not half mitzvahs and zochias, merits, and half the opposite, but even one avera, even a small sin, so to speak, a isur kal medivrei sofrim, as the Alter Rebbe explained and we elaborated last class, is also not in the category of a Beinani. It's a category of a Rasha. And if he did shuv, it's the category of a tzaddik. That explains, of course, why Rabbi was able to say, I am a Beinani. Because if a Beinani meant half sins, he couldn't make such a statement. So that was the last line we learned with the Hagah, that Umishum hachi tar Rabbi ba'atzmei lo mishu Beinani. And that is why Rabbi was able to make a mistake about himself and claim he was a Beinani. Because a Beinani doesn't have any Avedas. Okay, so now one final piece before the Alter Rebbe is going to begin to introduce the concept of a soul and what is a neshama and what makes us tick. One final piece that needs to be addressed, because the fact is, we do use the word, the expression, Chazal use the expression, when we talk about a Beinani, and the same thing with the Tzaddik and a Rasha, we do talk about how many sins they have and how many mitzvahs they have. So the Alter Rebbe wants to qualify what that means, so we should have a clear understanding of these terms, Tzaddik, Beinani, Rasha, not just in general, but very specifically. So he now asks a question, V'hod amrinon, after we just said that even a Beinani, for sure a tzaddik, doesn't even have one sin. So now the question is, V'hod amrinon ba'alma, the mechza mikre Beinani, v'reiv zochias mikre tzaddik. What about the common reference that we find in the texts, in Talmud and Medrash, that the Beinani is one with an equal proportion of transgressions to merits? And the tzaddik is one with a majority of merits. Just to give one reference of where this is brought, Alter Rebbe doesn't say it, but in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah 16b, Tazayin Beis, and Rashi there, and other places as well. Kedushin, Lamed Tes Beis, the Rambam Hilchos Tshuva, the beginning of chapter 3. These are a few places where we see that the Torah sources refer to them in the context of their behavior. We just said that a Beni is someone who doesn't even have an Aveda. So the Alter Rebbe responds that in truth, Hu Shem, that the truth is Hu Shem HaMushal Le'inyan Schar Ve'enish. That when this name, Beinoni or Tzaddik, is used, this represents, it's a figurative expression. Shem HaMushal, in Torah there's a Shem HaEtzem, the name of an object, or of an entity, or of a person, of a level. There's a Shem HaTorah, a description of that person. Shem HaMushal is not quite like a Shem HaKinui, which is a nickname, but it's not an exact name, not a precise name. It's a name used in general terms. So the Alter Rebbe is saying clearly that this is a Shem HaMushal Le'inyan Schar Ve'enish. This represents a figurative expression, the use of terms Tzaddik and Beinoni, for the purpose of illustrating an entirely different aspect, and that is regarding God's reward and punishment to these people. So it's not describing their very muchus, their personality, but rather it's describing something in relation to Schar Ve'enish. Lefi shenidun achar rubui, because when it comes to judging someone, meaning God judging someone for merit or for the opposite, God forbid, is because a person is judged by God according to the majority of his merits or transgressions. So what do we call him a tzaddik? If, for example, a person is brought before a court of law, before a bezdin, and they find him innocent, so we're using the word tzaddik, means he's righteous, he prevailed, he was acquitted of the accusation. If you find him guilty, you call him a rasha, not because he's the category of a rasha, but because he was found guilty of the transgression. So it's a classification that we use simply because we need some language. So we call the person, he was like tzaddik, you're right and you're wrong. That doesn't mean the person is a tzaddik. It's based on this particular situation that we're addressing. We're addressing it based on this behavior. In this situation, you were tzaddik. You're right. And the other person is wrong. So he's classified. He's classified as a righteous one, not because that's his personality, but in his verdict, when he's acquitted in judgment by Hashem, by God, then he's called righteous. The Rambam that I cited before, in Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Gimel, chapter 3, the Halacha Aleph and the Halacha Hey talk about this. So therefore, when we say the term that a Beinoni is called Mechze al Mechze, that he has half merits and half transgressions, it's not talking about a description of his personality, because personality, as we said, is one that doesn't have sin. It's talking about a particular situation, we can say more of a verb than a noun. Not his state of being, but his behavior at the time. And the same thing with a tzaddik. So the fact that we spoke earlier that a Beinoni and for sure a tzaddik don't have any Avedis is not a contradiction. Because these words are used as a Shem HaMushal, and that is used as an actual name, a Shem HaToyar, of or even more than that, of this individual. So in other words, there's a fundamental difference between being righteous in a verdict and being a righteous person. In other words, a tzaddik in this particular verdict that he's acquitted or he's considered innocent or he prevails, he wins, versus saying that the person is that way. So therefore, as far as reward and punishment goes, yes, because he was found correct, so therefore he's rewarded. The one that's found guilty is the one that's punished. Regarding a Beinani, how would you apply that? It wouldn't be a Bezdin, because how could you say the Bezdin says he's have this, have that? It means you apply the same idea that when we say that he has merits and righteous, it's just a description regarding this type of person has situations where he's righteous and situations where he's not. But it's not, the person, it's based on his behavior regarding this aspect of it. But when we come now to understanding the actual meaning of Tzaddik, Beinani, and Rasha, then it's what Alter Rebbe is making the case that it's not based on the actual behavior of this given situation, it's based on the personality of the individual. Okay. And that's what he continues. Aval li'inyan amit Shem HaToyar v'hamayla shel mayla shel madregas chalukis tzaddik u'beinanim. But when speaking of the true, inner and definitive definition and name and quality that distinguishes the personality of the tzaddikim from beinanim, then Amru Rabbeinu Zechreinim Livracha tzaddikim yetzer tev shefton, citing the Chazal we mentioned earlier in Tanya. Then we would say the sages teaches us. This was in Brachas 61b. In the case of tzaddikim, their impulse is good. Their impulse to good is their judge. In other words, what rules and governs them is their impulse to good. And we already explained what means tzaddik v'tevle as well in this regard. So this is the true Shem HaTeir, amiti Shem HaTeir v'hamayla, in contrast to the Shem HaMushal. So you can use the word tzaddik as a Shem HaMushal, you can use the word tzaddik as a Shem HaTeir. And you find this in many different places. For example, when it says in Mashiach comes, V'asiresi leiv ha'evan, v'nisati lem, I will remove a heart of stone and give them a heart of flesh. Obviously it doesn't mean a heart of actual stone. It's a Shem HaMushal. It's using it like an example, figuratively, that it's like hard like stone, insensitive like stone. So we find in Torah all the time, you'll find things that are in Shem HaMushal. It's used figuratively, or times that it's used as an actual Shem HaToyer, which is a descriptive name. You describe something, its actual features, that's different than a name that you're using as figurative explanation. Okay. And the Alter Rebbe will now start giving us a little more taste of this tzaddik to show what the real meaning of a tzaddik is, not in the context of a Shem HaMushal, figurative name. Shenemar continues now saying, now that we've established Shem HaTeir and Shem HaMayla, which is a key thing to remember, he says, so what does it mean, Yetzer Tev Sheftan? Here too, you could say, one second, maybe it means it governs, but who says he doesn't have anything negative? So in addition to what we learned earlier, that even a Beinani does not have a sin, for sure tzaddik, he goes on and says, Shenemar, v'li bichol b'kirbi. The Talmud that we talked about, the Talmud in Brachas, continues when it talks about tzaddikim, Yetzer Tev Sheftan. So it says that this is a pasuk from Tehillim 109:22, which is Kuf Tes Chav Beis. What did David HaMelech say in the verse? Shenemar, my heart is empty within me. What does that mean? My heart is empty within me. What does the Gemara mean? Means that he has no longer a Yetzer Hara. He only has a Yetzer Tev. He only has the good inclination, not a evil inclination. Simply put, that tzaddik is devoid of an impulse to evil. Libi chol b'kirbi. She'ein lo Yetzer Hara. He has no Yetzer Hara. As the Gemara Yerushalmi tells us, Seita Hey 5:5, and in the Karban Eda there, that's what the meaning is, Libi chol b'kirbi. That same Gemara, Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tev Sheftan, that he has no Yetzer Hara. That's the true meaning of a tzaddik. The tzaddik that's righteous in verdict, in a judgment, as we said, that's a figurative statement. That's a figurative description. The real description is this description, that he has no longer a Yetzer Hara. So the word Yetzer Tev Shefta means that the exclusive and only judge that governs the tzaddik is his good inclination. How did he achieve that? If every person is born with both Yetzer Tev and Yetzer Hara, how did David HaMelech achieve this level? How is it possible for someone, a tzaddik, to achieve a level where there's no longer an evil inclination? So the Alter Rebbe continues, Ki hargi b'tainus. Because David HaMelech, he annihilated the Yetzer Hara through fasting. That's what the Korban Ha'edah, the commentary in Yerushalmi, says. Elsewhere, there are other reasons given. There's a Zohar Chodosh, Zohar Chodosh, Tikkunim 106d, that talks about how that he did it through Limud HaTorah. But the Alter Rebbe is bringing the Korban Ha'edah, he did it through annihilating the Yetzer Hara with fasting. So no, it was work. He ultimately subdued and annihilated the evil inclination. Later we're going to learn, when we learn the real difference between a tzaddik and a beini in chapters 10 and then 12 and on, that this is actually what distinguishes a tzaddik from a beini. Because a beini does not kill the evil inclination, as we shall learn. He doesn't do averis, as we discussed. But to kill the Yetzer Hara is a unique characteristic of the tzaddik. Then the Alter Rebbe continues. Aval kol mi shelo higia lemadrega zu. But anyone who has not yet reached this level of libi b'chol b'kirbi, of annihilating the Yetzer Hara, so there's that empty space, as he called it, that void within him, void in a positive way. My heart is empty within me. So said anyone who has not yet reached this level, even if his merits outweigh his transgressions. So in other words, he would be called righteous figuratively, Shema Mushal, in a verdict, in a judgment. As we discussed earlier, he's not, in reality, because he did not destroy and annihilate his Yetzer Hara, the evil, he's not at the first level. He's not at the level of a tzaddik at all. Why? Because now we're talking about the tzaddik in the real definition, the actual description of the tzaddik, not the figurative one. So here you have it clearly, that you see that in one place tzaddik is referred to someone who has no Yetzer Hara. Another place that tzaddik is referred to someone whose merits outweigh his transgressions. So the Alter Rebbe is answering very straightforward. One is tzaddik shema mushal. You're using it figuratively, not as the actual definition of the individual, but the true actual definition of the individual is when he has no sins at all, and more than that, he has no Yetzer Hara. So of course, this is quite a unique situation. You don't find this commonly. So the Alter Rebbe right here has already lifted the standard what a tzaddik is. A tzaddik is not just someone who does good things. It's not that expression we just said, like a grandmother would say to her child, oh, you're a tzaddikal. Or someone would say sometimes the other way around, not appropriately, and call someone in a very derogatory term. You're obviously talking figuratively, or maybe even exaggerated in those situations, but at least not more than figuratively. Whereas a true tzaddik, if you really respect and understand what the Torah means by a tzaddik, the Alter Rebbe has begun to give us a taste of it. We're going to learn a lot more about this later, but we have to first understand what makes the human being tick and what defines us as individuals, which of course is so much the essence of Chassidus, to define the neshama of who you are, your personality, not just what you do, but who you are. What you do is vital and critical, because behavioral is the bottom line, hamaiso iker. But the Tanya is going deeper into that because it was talking about internal transformation, not just on an action level, but a fundamental level. So we were getting already a taste of where the Alter Rebbe is going and the standard that he's lifted all of us. Because even tzaddik, if the tzaddik is on this level, and a beinoni is not someone with any sin, And a Rasha, therefore, is also not just someone who's doing bad things. We're already getting a glimpse into the deeper personality of the human condition, the human being. Okay. Then the Alter Rebbe says, and concludes this section, U'lechein omru Rabbeinu zichreinim levracha. Lechein omru Razal, b'medrash. That is why our sages taught us in Medrash. Ra HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'tzadikim she'em mu'atim. Omad v'shaslan b'chol der v'der. HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw that the tzadikim were few. Mu'atim could also mean rare, but few. So he carefully placed them in each generation. The Gemara says this in Yuma, Lamed Ches Beis 38b. If the tzaddik was like in the Shem HaMushal, just figuratively someone whose merits outweighs transgressions, then how do you explain this chazal? Mu'atim? There are many people whose merits outweigh their transgressions. But now that we understand the tzaddik in his true definition, so now we understand this chazal, this Maimer chazal, that God saw there are few of them, because they're not common. And therefore he carefully planted them and placed them in each generation, because they would be so critical and so necessary. U'kamashikosuv, the tzaddik yusei de'elam. As the verse says, that tzaddik is the foundation of the world. This is in Mishlei Yud Chafei 10:25, Proverbs. When you read this simply, it sounds like this is bringing proof to the first statement that the tzaddikim are few. But the fact is, when you look deeper, tzaddik yusei de'elam is even more than just a few. It means one individual who's like the foundation of the world. But regarding our discussion here, that's not so relevant, because the main point he wants to point out is that we have now a taste of, a glimpse into the true tzaddik, a rare phenomenon who has no yetzer hara, at least one level of a tzaddik, and who's the foundation of the world, or few, and God plants them in each generation. So it's not just the Shem HaMushal of a tzaddik, a good person, a good guy, like you would say. It's a good guy, tzaddik, but actually the real, actual Torah definition. So before we go to the next section in Tanya, which is really beginning and opening up the vistas of the human soul, in conclusion, what we've learned so far, now let's just sum it up, is the opening statement of the mission of our lives. Be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha. But we've also learned that tzaddik and rasha are not just do good things and don't do bad things. That goes without saying, or even if it goes with saying, but that's obvious. But it's much more than that. We're talking about here elevate yourself to a far more refined place. We also learned, as we said, if everyone tells you that you're a tzaddik, you should look at yourself like a rasha, and the Alter Rebbe asked the question what that means. It would seem to be very debilitating and demoralizing. Then he went further into understanding the terms, what is tzaddik and rasha? Once you've established, be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha, and that's like the mission of your life, why your soul was sent down here. And the soul's empowered with that oath and empowerment. From the word mashbi'in and mazbi'in, v'savata, empowered, sated, with those resources, so we must understand what tzaddik and rasha are. And then he also introduces the third category, the Beinoni. And through a process of elimination, explains that you cannot say that these levels are just behavioral, good deeds or bad deeds. That there's something deeper going on. Brings from the Zoyar, v'tevloi, tzaddik v'tevloi. It's not just that he's living a good life. It means tev is dominant in him. It controls everything. Like we learn now, Shefton, what is his not main, his only governing force is his Yetzer Tev. And anywhere where we use tzaddik or Beinoni or rasha in terms of merits and transgressions, he says that's a Shem HaMushal, a figurative name that we use in context of a verdict, of a judgment, in reward and punishment. Now, ultimately, we're going to learn that the Beinoni is the optimal thing we're seeking to be. What we know now is that a Beinoni, Rabbi has taught us, that a Beinoni is not someone that just has half mitzvahs, half opposite, but is someone that does not have sins, but he's still not a tzaddik. But for this, we need to now continue learning. So let's begin the next section. Let me begin, where now he's going to introduce the story of the two souls. What drives the human being? We know we have a physical body, that we know. But we also know that what life constitutes life is not just a body, there's also a soul. From the moment of conception, a soul enters, as the Gemara says, there are three partners: Father, Mother, and God. Father and Mother supply the physical body. And the God provides the neshama. But what is this neshama exactly? So he's going to explain it by citing from Kabbalah, from Rachav, Kisvei Arizal. He says like this. And this, of course, is going to explain who we are, and then we can come back and understand what means Tzaddik, Beinoni, and Rasha. So to put it in different terms, you can say that understanding the soul, once you know that, then you can come back and define who we are. Not just what we do, not just our behavior, not just the figurative definition of Tzaddik. You want to understand what really makes them tick, you need to understand what's inside them, what's going on. So an analysis of their soul, and both souls, as we'll talk about, and how they behave and control and affect our lives, is vital to understanding who we are. So you can put it in simple terms: Tzaddik, Beinoni, and Rasha are basically barometers. They're ways of measuring the soul's impact on us. As we'll be learning, the divine soul, the animal soul, what impact they have on the human being. Now, obviously, it's translated into action ultimately, but it's much more than that. It's what impact they have on our psyche, on our very being. So to understand these two souls, Alter Rebbe is going to cite from Rabbi Chaim Vital, who is, of course, the primary student of the Arizal, from his Sefer Shari HaKedusha, that there are two souls, the divine soul and the animal soul. And this we'll learn in the next shir. If you want to ask any questions, please go to TanyaApply.com and you can submit any question or comment. You also can go and see there all the previous episodes of this program. Be well.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApply.com for archived classes and more resources.